my talk. Here we go. How he said he living life as a gringo. Where you question where you fit in every time you mingle. They say you do this with not enough that. My rapping is really bad. This life as a gringo.
Yes, hello and welcome to another episode of Life as a Gringo. I am Dramos, of course. And man, before I even get into today's topic, because we're going to continue our conversation on the 4 pillars of conscious living that I've been working on, I just want to say, I woke up feeling amazing today. And without getting into all the details, it's not because I've had some crazy thing happen in my life or some breakthrough as far as career goes or whatever. It's just like I've just gotten some weight off of my chest, right? And anybody who's not going to therapy and you are just trying to figure shit out on your own, I would really, really just, I don't know, ask you to rethink that, right? And because no matter how smart you are, no matter how self-aware you are, sometimes you just need someone who is sort of someone who doesn't have like a vested interest, who is literally just going to give it to you straight up and give you not only great advice, because I feel like more of a therapist is what they do is kind of lead you to, you know, the water. They don't make you drink it, so to speak. But what I'm trying to say is this. I had been kind of struggling with a personal situation, not really knowing what to do, and kind of felt like my pride was getting the best of me. And even though I was just feeling it, you know, I was going through the gamut of emotions and not in a great place mentally and really just trying to, you know, will my way to getting through all of my normal everyday tasks these last couple of weeks. My therapist, you know, kind of led me down this great conversation and got to this point of talking about the idea of closure and putting your ego aside and doing what it takes, having the hard, uncomfortable, awkward conversation or whatever it might be to get closure out of a situation. And the irony is that that situation didn't pan out exactly as I would have hoped or even just imagined as I thought it was going to go. It probably the complete opposite of it, so to speak. But I left it all out there, right? And I challenged myself to say, what do I need to get closure out of this particular situation, right? If this is my only opportunity to kind of address it, what do I want to make sure I say? And I want to make sure I don't hold anything back. And I did that. And again, even though it didn't pan out as one would have hoped, I woke up today just feeling amazing. Like I got that closure that I was looking for. I know that I did everything in my control to sort of steer the course of this particular situation. And there's nothing else I could do. I can't go back and change things in the past, but I laid everything out there and left myself open and put myself out there in a vulnerable way and know that if that didn't affect the outcome of this situation moving forward, then it's just not for me. And I'm being vague here. You know, obviously I'm talking about a sort of I don't know, potential romantic relationship. I guess I'm not gonna bullshit you guys. I feel like I've opened up enough here on the show, but yeah, a situation that I wasn't sure how I wanted it to go, and it kind of had ended, and you know, without getting into the messy details, respecting people's privacy, I had been just sort of second guessing some of my decisions within that, and just wanted to kind of get some closure on the situation. So that's what I did. And that has nothing to do with the fuck we're talking about today. But I just feel like the clouds have sort of cleared and I feel really good and really just great about myself today. And again, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be, you know, have arrived to like a healthier mindset about the whole situation had it not been for the fact that I have somebody that I talk to on a regular basis, a therapist who can kind of guide me through some of these thoughts and emotions that I'm going through, right? So that's just my PSA. I'm not getting paid by any of these therapy companies or anything like that. I just think it's important, and I'm getting value out of it. I know there's a lot of stigma that still exists, particularly in our community and even around men in general. But for what it's worth, I've put myself out there talking to a stranger, and I can honestly tell you in real time, it's really been helping me work through a lot of shit. And I'm forever grateful that I've done that I've met my therapist, that I've found a therapist that I really like. I just kind of wanted to encourage anybody who might be going through something, or you're on the fence about this whole therapy thing still. Trust me, it's uncomfortable, it's weird, but it works, it helps. Now with that said, changing gears pretty much completely here. But actually not really, because we're talking about healing, right? And conscious living in general, the concept we've been talking about, I've been talking about on the podcast over the last few weeks. Specifically, we started last week with awareness, which is one of the 4 pillars, including money, healing, community, and long-term vision. And again, the idea of conscious living is understanding the power in each decision you make and being present to it, right? And therapy goes into that. The idea of taking action to help yourself and understand that this is an investment in yourself financially, time-wise, and also your trust, right? And consciously taking that risk to give yourself the chance at a better life, right? A healthier, happier life. And that's what taking the leap of faith into therapy is, right? But today we're talking about money healing. That's the second pillar on the conscious living, sort of ideology that we're talking about for the Just Be Social Club. And we're going to be launching the new one-on-ones. September, we'll be opening up that offer for anybody interested, and it's really going to be honing in on these 4 pillars. But today, money healing, when I was coming up with sort of, again, like these are things that specifically have changed my life, I can't get around money, right? I hate talking about money. I hate having to, ever sort of charge anybody for anything. I hate having to negotiate. I just don't, money bothers me. I just think it dirties up so much. But with that said, it is a necessary tool in the world that we live in to not only sort of provide ourselves with the human essentials, but also it is a tool and a part, not the whole thing, but a part of how we can achieve happiness and fulfillment, right? Because we do need money to, sustain a particular lifestyle, right? Whatever that is for us. So a lot of people, myself included, carry around a lot of sort of money trauma. If you grew up poor, then, there's a lot of things you're dealing with that. Or, even if you, were around parents who didn't manage money well, didn't educate you on money. Like, there's just so many different things that go on. And I'll talk a bit about my own journey, my different struggles with money, because I've had them and I still continue to have them and I have to work through them. But the idea of this is, you can't be happy and fulfilled if you don't have a healthy relationship with money, right? Money is one of the leading causes of stress and anxiety, right? There's no way you could be happy-go-lucky if you're constantly worrying about, where your next meal is going to come from, or, how you're going to pay the rent, how you're going to keep your lights on, right? It's just tough to be in a constant state of happiness and fulfillment if you're having these nagging questions in the back of your mind, right? So we're going to talk about money healing, a bit of my journey with that. I also pulled up an article from mint.com that talks about financial trauma and how to deal with it. I thought that'd be a great kind of starting point for today's conversation, to really just dive into the idea of financial trauma and money healing, which again is one of the 4 pillars of conscious living, which we'll be really diving into a lot deeper and a lot more personally for anybody interested in joining the new course that we're going to be laying out there, a new meetup, one-on-one, whatever you want to word it as. Again, like my whole hope with this Just Be thing is to just be, and that sounds redundant now, but my whole hope with this Just Be thing is to really just try and impact as many people's lives as possible, specifically, people of color, people from our community who have not had this information or have not seen voices that look like them, people that look like them, giving this information out, readily and speaking a language that we kind of understand and that speaks to us, So that's the goal with Just Be, the Just Be Social Club and everything. So Just Be at NYC, you want to check out the site. We're updating a bunch of stuff, but this is all going to be a huge part of it, the 4 pillars of conscious living. So without further ado, let's first just do like a deep dive into the idea of financial trauma, and we'll do it in a segment we call For the People in the Back.
Say it louder for the people in the back. Say it louder for the people in the back.
All right, so this is from Mint, livemint.com is the website, and this is an article written by Sharmila Bedoya, and it's what is financial trauma, how to deal with it, know from experts, right? And in the article, they say, whenever you borrow money or are burdened with expenses, it's not just your bank account that suffers. They also affect your mental health and emotional well-being. Financial hardships and losses can leave a long-lasting impact on the mind and cause trauma and stress. Financial trauma can be thought of in two ways. First, it can be thought of as any state of distress that is activated by a difficult relationship with money. Financial trauma also refers to the ways our trauma histories, separate of finances, display themselves through an unhealthy relationship with money, said Minachi, a faculty member of Trauma of Money, right? Now, they go on to say, quote, relationships people have with money and their patterns of spending tells a lot about their childhood and how much their needs were met at that time, explained Yitma Sharma, clinical psychologist and the co-founder of Orange Owl Percepts. In many cases, scarcity of money leads to anxiety and mental health issues that are termed financial trauma. I'm going to pause there for a second, right? Because obviously a lot of what I've ever learned about our trauma, and I've talked about it, I've regurgitated that information on the podcast. It's based around our own childhood experiences, right? The good, the bad, what we didn't have, the way we interpreted things, whatever. So for many of us, if we grew up in a situation where money was a stressor for our parents, which I know that it was for me, and we'll kind of dive into that in the Mi Gente segment, and sort of watching as it felt like we never had enough money, that definitely led to a paranoia in my adult life that still exists, that I still work through, of feeling like I never am going to have enough, or worried that it's going to be taken away, or whenever a big expense comes up, I panic even if I have the money, or I feel like, oh my God, I have the worst luck in the world. The second I'm saving money, all of a sudden this big thing happens, right? And those are all trauma sort of loops and narratives that are a result of my own childhood and experiences, And then beyond that, I've also gone through periods of overspending, which if we talk about childhood stuff, when I was a kid, it always felt like my friends had the cool gadgets, had the cool things, and they made it a point to sort of point out the fact that I didn't have those things, right? So when I did get a hold of some money, my first inclination was to start collecting random shit that would impress people to a degree, right? Or not even consciously thinking about impressing people, but just, wanting to have these things that represented some sort of status. And again, I'll dive a bit deeper into that in the Mi Gente segment, but just to kind of give you some examples of what they're talking about here. And they go on to say, there are 2 to 3 ways of financial trauma. One is when you have money, and the other is when you lose money. The inability to meet self-set targets of earning money also causes anxiety and trauma. People who are unemployed or underemployed are its biggest victims, said Bapai-based psychologist Dr. Kaloy Ray. I'm sorry if I'm butchering people's names here, but I'll leave the link in the show notes if you really want to look these people up. Yeah, I think that's an interesting sort of distinction we were just kind of talking about in my own personal way, how it shows up, but how there are these 2 to 3 different ways, of what happens when you have money and you lose money, the ability to sort of obtain the amount that you feel like you need, and yeah, these are all things that I know that I've definitely struggled with and tried to make sense of and tried to heal around. And I imagine it's probably ringing true for a lot of you listening right now. So moving on kind of through the article here, there's a couple more things I wanted to touch on as far as diving deeper into this idea. They say the impacts of financial trauma, right? And they say one of the main impacts of financial trauma is inferiority complex. People face emotional hardships because they are unable to get a job or earn as per their expectations. Shame and avoidance are another result of financial trauma. People who lose their hard-earned money in business and in gambling often end up being in guilt and not being able to talk about it, said Dr. Kaloy Ray. In such cases, people are inclined to alcoholism and drugs as well. The one that I really relate to on this, not to make it all about me, but just to kind of share with you a bit, it's the inferiority complex. right? A lot of the things that I struggle with till this day is based upon an inferiority complex, right? I talk about as a kid, my friends having the cool gadgets, um, and sort of me being looked down upon for not having those things. I think as a man, as a young man, a lot of times, women are attracted to status or money, right? And the cars and the job and the person who had their own apartment or was living on their own, even if it meant having a roommate, but like, just not living at home, right? And I was somebody who lived at home. I moved out once and then ended up going back home, but whatever. I basically didn't really leave my parents' house for good until my late 20s, right? I just financially wasn't able to do it. And a lot of, I think, my bad decisions around money or obsession with it stem from feeling inferior to a lot of the people around me and sort of seeing money as the tool to get me the attention that I wanted. Money and success. And I think sort of fame or notoriety is a part of that as well for me. But I think at the center of that is money, right? Is this sort of idea of I need it in order to feel good about myself and get the sort of attention from others that I'm looking for, right? So that is definitely something that I relate to. Now they go on to talk about how trauma can also lead to anxiety and panic attacks, right? One such example was of a young boy who wanted to pursue his music career, but could not because of his father's business during the COVID pandemic. He ultimately gave up on his dreams to support his family. Slowly, his financial hardship started affecting his relationship with friends and partner, recalled the doctor. And I mean, that's a very, kind of light example. But it is, I don't even, light is the right word. I think I could have probably found one that would have driven the point home a bit more. But yeah, it does affect your relationship with those around you, right? If you're unhappy, you're stressed, you're anxious, how the fuck are you supposed to have a healthy relationship with anybody else if the one with yourself is so toxic, right? They say financial trauma also impacts our mind and body and affects our pattern of spending money. When our bodies go through roller coaster loops of emotion without being able to ground and settle, it's an indication that trauma is present, said Mediachi, who has experience in helping individuals with ancestral money trauma, right? So they give a bunch of little examples like this, and I'm not going to read every single one here. But I know for me at times when I felt down, right, I can then be like, oh, I'm just going to go like on a shopping spree and make myself feel better, right? And buy all these little things to kind of fill the void in the moment. And then only to like have it come full circle when that high is worn off that I'm so mad at myself that I like wasted money on X, Y, and Z when I really have been wanting to save, right? Those are loops I've felt within myself, right? And again, like that's a terrible cycle because if I'm trying to get to a particular goal in my life and I need to, whatever it is, I want to buy a house, I just want to be financially stable, I want to work for myself, all of that requires me to have, some sort of money put away, have some sort of consistent income, whatever it might be. And me then just sort of using money and frivolous sort of shopping as a means to cure whatever, sadness or depression I'm going through, it ends up in the long run taking me further away from my long-term vision, right? And it's like that short-term thinking that we end up falling victim to a lot of times, that just is not in line with the life that we actually want for ourselves. And again, that doesn't just exist with money, but money is a huge part of our lives, and we have to kind of be able to talk about it and attack it head on. Now, the last thing that they talk about here is how much do we talk about financial trauma? They say, given its extent of its importance given to mental health issues, and this is specifically was written in India, but it obviously rings true everywhere. Healing and even acknowledging financial trauma seems a distant call. At times, people are not even able to identify they're facing financial trauma because of money in their daily lives. In many cases, people come to us and talk about what's causing their mental stress and emotional hardship It is only after listening to them that we can figure out the link between money and their trauma. So I find this to be interesting because I think a lot of us are walking around with trauma or unhappy, whatever it might be, and we're never completely aware of like the fact that money could be having such a big impact on it, right? We're never ready to have that conversation, because money is this sort of thing that we're not supposed to speak about. You don't talk about how much you make. You don't let other people know you're having trouble, right? We're too proud to ask for help and things like that, right? Money is like this sort of thing that we don't speak about, And as I kind of even started the podcast today on the importance of a therapist, it's like, if you don't speak about these things, if you don't tackle them head on, if you don't make an attempt to really try and figure them out and get a better understanding of them and get clarity, they're just going to keep being things that hold you back from being the version of yourself that you really want to be, right? And I think that's, obviously evident in even just physically, or mentally, the way these things can bring up, terrible feelings within you, causing anxiety or depression or things like that. And then even externally, them causing you to sort of live a life that you don't really feel great about, right? That you're not happy about, that doesn't feel fulfilled. And I think that's, all of the conversation we're trying to have with this Just Be Social Club is like really identifying how do we create a focused mind that gives us the best path towards truly being happy and fulfilled, right? And that's the whole purpose of the 4 pillars and conscious living in general, and making decisions very intentionally, is the goal to get us to a place of happiness and fulfillment. And money healing needs to be a part of that, because so many of us are carrying around a lot of trauma unnecessarily. And with that said, I want to talk a bit about my own relationship with money and kind of why this is one of the things that I felt like needed to be included in the Just Be Social Club, and is a mainstay of the idea of conscious living, because of the impact it's had on my life. So I want to be able to tackle that. We'll talk about it in our Mi Gente segment. Mi Gente. All right, so I'm gonna be very open and honest and vulnerable here in regards to money, and this is hugely important when it comes to money healing. And I don't want to say any one thing is more important when it comes to the 4 pillars, but I know that for me personally, money has been such a hindrance to my happiness for a very long time, right? And it fed into so many of my feelings of inferiority and my lack of validation and my search for validation, right? And yeah, money has been one of the toughest things that I've really tried to overcome. And it's interesting because I love business and I pride myself on it, and it's been like a really rocky, tough road to getting to a place where I've sort of been able to figure out any sort of the financial aspect of it, right? And I just think in general, money and everything that comes along with it, credit and all these different things, finances, was just such like a thing that made me feel so fucking small, right? In so many ways, and I think for such a long time. And yeah, I think, as they mentioned the article I referenced earlier about childhood, and I talk so much about how a lot of shit comes from your childhood. It starts there, right? And I want to say first and foremost, I never was a kid who like had to worry where his next meal was coming from, or didn't have, clean clothes to wear, or any of those types of things, right? But my parents, as great of a job as they did to make sure we had those basic needs met, even during the hard times, my parents had a lot of financial hardships. My parents grew up, or I grew up with them living check to check, and money was always a source of an argument for them, right? We had to hide bills and things like that from my father, and to avoid a fight, an argument. And there were so many times that I would come home and the power got cut off because the bill wasn't paid, or that our cable got cut and we didn't have cable for like a good decade, because my parents never paid the bill, and I guess like weren't able to get the cable reconnected if they had to pay it first, like stupid shit like that, and credit card debt. Again, my parents did a great job of sort of putting up the facade that we were okay. I think within that, it's spending money they didn't have that they shouldn't have been spending, right? A lot of me in adulthood was trying to figure out the things that they hadn't, right? But then also at the same time, sort of just like reliving the same fucking experiences, My parents had a horrible credit, and it would be like this big ordeal when they had to go get a car. I ended up having horrible credit from like my first credit card and not paying it, and I didn't know how to fix it. Nobody really knew anything about credit scores, around me. And I would watch as my friends got their first car. They would graduate college and then, get the Lexus, and then they'd have their own apartment, and I'm still living at home, and I can remember being on like vacations with my friends or going away, and like, I would be like running out of money, and I'd have to pretend like, oh, I just didn't want to do something, but really it was because I couldn't afford it. Or we were trying to get a rental car and it was under my name, and my credit card had like $150 limit, and I couldn't get the fucking rental card. It was so embarrassing. Just a lot of little things. And again, my experiences aren't as extreme as others, but I'm just trying to give you a concept into like what shaped a lot of my limiting beliefs around myself, right? Because I always felt like, to a degree, the loser friend who needed an extra helping hand, right? Who everybody had to kind of look out for, or lend money to. Of course, when you're around that age, in your 20s or late teens or whatever it is, like everything for me as a straight male, like was about women and trying to get their attention, and always sort of down talking myself of like, oh, this girl is out of my league. She wouldn't be interested in me because I don't drive a cool car. And then as a DJ, and everybody's flashy, and it seems like everybody's making all this money and they're successful, and they're driving the Mercedes and the BMWs and all these things. And I think I was driving my Scion TC that like was just in really rough shape, and feeling embarrassed when I did get a girl's attention to have her come in my car, or to tell her that I lived at home with my parents. And yeah, it just made me feel lesser than. And then like I can even remember I had gotten this one girl's number. She's like a really attractive girl, and at that time that was like the last straw, because it was like I was hanging around a bunch of people who were being flashy again with the nice cars and all these things, and I was tired of like being the outlier who was kind of this disappointment, right? So around that time I ended up like using whatever I basically had in savings that at that time, like, and this is like the cycle again. At that time I had just gotten into radio. I wasn't making a lot of money. I was making $15 an hour, but between that and DJing and the fact that I lived at home, I was able to save a couple grand or whatever, right? Which at the time felt wild to me. Rather than build upon that and try and sort of, get myself out of my hole that I was in, because I was in credit card debt, I think, too, at that time. I decided I'm going to blow that little money I have in savings and buy a BMW, like a used BMW that, like was older, but it looked nice. Anybody who wasn't really aware of BMWs, it was still impressive, right? And I remember like that girl whose number I got, like I didn't even like text her to hang out until after I ended up getting the car. Like that was like the final straw. And it was like, weeks long process, like weeks and weeks and weeks, because of, my credit was so bad and everything like that. And going back and forth and just trying to raise a couple extra bucks. And, obviously I never ended up hanging out with that girl. And I ended up with this BMW that turned out to be a fucking lemon, and that like I was just constantly throwing money into it. Couldn't drive it half the time because it was like down for repairs and things like that. Again, I guess I bring up that story to just showcase like a cycle of like, oh, I'm saving money. Oh, okay, now I have money. Let me go buy the shiny thing to impress everybody, to make myself feel bigger, right? And that was a cycle I struggled with for a very long time. And I still have to watch myself on, right? But I lived broke for a very long time. Particularly, like, listen, if you're chasing a dream and you're going after something out of the ordinary, like, I couldn't have a job that was a regular 9 to 5 because I was always running around and trying to make something happen. So I had to have these sort of jobs that allowed me to be a bit more flexible, but of course they paid shitty or they weren't consistent hours, whatever it was, right? And again, as I'm watching everybody else sort of start their adult lives and move into adulthood and do all these impressive things that we're taught, is sort of this next status symbol, I'm just sitting here scared that my bank card is going to decline on buying a couple beers at the bar, right? Or that man, I can remember one time I was getting gas, and I remember I was going away that weekend to visit my cousin in upstate New York, and I was like, I used to budget everything, not because I was good at budgeting, but because I was so broke that I needed to be able to budget everything, right? So I like calculated, how much I was going to end up spending that weekend, going to hang out up there and things like that. And I was stopping to get gas, like the day before I left or something like that. And I think I told the guy, like, $20, whatever. He ended up filling it up. And I like lost my shit on the gas station attendant. I think I even called the cops because it's like this guy would try to rip me off. And it was like the difference of like, it probably cost me $45 to fill up my tank, and I asked for 20. So we're talking about $25. But that $25 felt like so much to me at that time. And it threw off my budgeting for like the rest of that trip, right? And yeah, I think back to those times, and it was like how much stress used to happen just as a result of things related to money. I mean, also like the fucking BMW, it had rims on it. And of course, like, there was barely any tread because they were larger rims than they should have been. And driving to New York from my parents' house almost every day, I would hit a fucking pothole on a regular basis. I would crack a rim. I would get a flat tire. And it was like this constant thing, this constant panic of how am I going to pay for this thing now? Or I would drive around with paranoia because I knew that this car wasn't reliable. And I was always scared of the next time it was going to break down on me. And the next, $1,000, there's always at least $1,000 I was going to have to dump into this car, right? I bring up that story because my long-term vision for myself was to be successful, was to be financially stable. I wanted all of those things. I wanted to have money put away. I wanted to get my own apartment. I wanted to do all those things. But here I was making a short-term decision, buying this car that I couldn't really afford just because I wanted the short-term validation that came along with people thinking I was successful, with women being impressed when I picked them up and it was a BMW, right? And in retrospect, none of those people that I was trying to impress really mattered at all. I don't even think I speak to probably any of them, right? And if I speak to any of it, it's in passing, right? Any of those people that I was trying to impress. But it was because I felt so shitty about myself, I was trying to use money to make up for that. And in doing so, I was taking myself further and further away from where I actually wanted to be, from what actually would make me fulfilled and happy. That's why this is so important, this conversation. And then obviously, like, beyond that, and I've talked about this a bunch of times, so I'm not going to like beat a dead horse, but when I eventually did get my credit fixed, and I did in a few months just turn my life around into getting really hardcore about saving so I could buy my property and make sure that I didn't give into wanting to buy a house that was going to impress people, but instead bought me a property that was an investment that would be making me money, right? Making those decisions for my longer term, my long-term vision, right? As opposed to short-term, what would impress my friends, right? All of those sort of decisions that were smarter, right? I now look back on and I'm so grateful for, and I wouldn't have been able to do that had I not have come to terms to a degree with money and knowing that it's a tool and that it shouldn't be the thing or the things that it buys or that it gives me. I can't rely on them to make me love myself or to make me think that I'm worthy of other people's love, right? And that's a part of money healing as well. And again, I still have to check myself. I still have those habits. I still, and when I'm down about something, or I'm like, wanting to get somebody's attention, I'm like, fuck it, I'm gonna go buy like this fresh ass outfit and go stun on somebody, right? Or if I'm, gonna be having people over, or I'm going to be driving somewhere, I'm like, man, all my friends, all these people I'm like hanging out with are like rich people who drive these fancy cars, and like, have a nice Jeep, but it's not like a, anything that's like gonna impress anybody. I have to like check myself to be like, but who the fuck cares? Like, that doesn't matter. And if they care that much, it's not really people I should be around, right? But these are narratives I keep having to have conversations with myself, just to stay on that right path of thinking in terms of, where do I want to be? What person do I want to be, right? And then even again, spending stuff, like, checking myself on like, why are you eating out every night and paying, $30 for Uber to deliver a Chipotle burrito that costs $11? Like, that doesn't make sense, right? Either you can make sure you have food in the house and you go grocery shopping to make sure you don't do that, or you stop being lazy and just drive yourself over there to save the $20 or whatever it is that you're spending in tip, delivery fees, and everything else, tax, whatever the fuck it is. These are all kind of silly things, but it adds up, because then I would feel guilty, and then I would see it hit my credit card, and then like I would just feel shame around the fact that I'm spending all this money on Grubhub or Uber Eats or whatever, and it's just like that's not, of course, those aren't like inherently bad things, but my abuse of them wasn't in line with what I was actually trying to do, right? I want to buy another property. I want to hit a certain financial goal, by the end of the year. Neither one of those things are happening if I'm being reckless about how I spend my money. If I'm choosing to, constantly go out and take the weekends off instead of working a little bit extra, right? Like, I have to have those real conversations with myself and do the healing that's necessary to like have a better relationship with money, and my accumulation of it, my saving of it, and my spending of it, right? And again, it's healing those older parts of me that from a kid, that grew up with a lot of stress related to money, and not allowing that to now dictate how I live in my life as an adult, and the relationship that I have with money as an adult, if that makes sense. So I just kind of wanted to give you a bit of insight into like my own journey with healing with money, and the ongoing work that I continue to do with it, and how it's also played an incredible role. The healing has played an incredible role in changing my life around, in my own confidence and my own happiness and fulfillment, and the life that I get to lead now. I wouldn't be able to work for myself had I not have developed a better relationship with money, where I know more about budgeting and saving and things like that, right? And had I not have set goals financially, like, okay, I'm going to quit my 9 to 5 once I reach X amount of money saved up, so I know I have a runway, right? Having that conversation with myself, and then being disciplined to actually go out and do it, and not fall victim to the narratives running through my head about, the little momentary joy a materialistic thing may bring me. So again, just topics to kind of, so you can begin to have the conversation with yourself around this, right? And identify maybe some of the financial trauma that you might be carrying around. And again, that's the money healing aspect of the 4 pillars of conscious living that we're talking about. Now, with that said, we're going to tie everything we talked about today in a neat little bow, and we'll do it in a segment we call Conclusions Too.
Time for conclusions soon.
All right, so we've gotten really deep into this whole conversation around money healing. It got a little dark for a second in talking about my relationship with money, but I think it just goes to show you, the sort of profound effect that money can have on us in a negative way if we're not really conscious about our relationship with it, right? And that's why these conversations are so incredibly important. And like, it's a real term, a clinical term. Financial trauma is a real thing, as we heard in that article, which I'll put in the show notes, a link to it. But from real doctors who study these things, that this is an actual type of trauma. And a lot of it based around the way we grew up and our parents' relationship with money, about how we experienced it, and our lack of at times, and how that sort of replays in our adult life into our current relationship with it. And again, like, I don't think money is inherently evil. I think that our relationship to it and what we've been taught could potentially be evil, right? Our overvalue of it and viewing it as anything but a tool, right? If we view it as the destination, as the win, as the gain, then we're really doing a disservice to ourselves and our overall happiness, and I think the overall good of the world. But when we recognize it as the tool that it is, right? Again, because it's a tool, it's a necessary tool. It is a part of the sort of happiness equation, but again, it's not the end all be all. And that's what the sort of goal of money healing is, to get us to that place where we are, able to consciously be able to see it like that and not have a negative connotation or an over obsession with money itself, right? Really having a healthier relationship with it and what it does for us here in the real world, Now, with that said, this is the second part of this sort of 4 pillars to conscious living focus that I'm doing on the podcast this month. So again, every Tuesday episode, we will be tackling one of the 4 pillars. Last week was awareness. This week was money healing. Next week will be community. And the one after that will be a long-term vision. So just trying to provide these things that have changed my life so deeply. And obviously, like, there's only but so much I can put in a podcast. It's different than you or I having a one-on-one conversation and really just tackling your own specific story to it, which is what we're hoping to do with the next iteration of the Just Be Social Club, which will be launching in September, is really have a bit more of a close dialogue, focus in on these different topics that we're talking about. So follow at justbe.nyc on Instagram or at DJ Dramos on Instagram, and I'll be posting updates and things like that when we do open up the offer for anybody interested in joining the next iteration. But this is life-changing stuff. I don't say that as like a fucking sales tactic. Like, genuinely, I'm giving you the things that have changed my life, or the things that I've adapted or think about on a regular basis that have led me to being happier than I've ever been. And of course, I'm still on my own journey, just like everybody else is, just like we all will be till the day we die. But these are the things that have changed my life around drastically, that have really just put me on this incredible path where the good moments far, outweigh the bad ones, which is not something I could have said for a long time in various points in my life. So for me, this has been life-changing stuff, and I'm hoping that it can have the same effect on anybody listening. But that's it. Again, 4 pillars of conscious living. We're tackling it every Tuesday for this month. And I'll catch y'all on Thursday for our Thursday Trends episode. A lot to talk about there, so we'll get into it. So then, though, stay safe. We'll talk soon. Peace.